ceasefire has been announced. It's holding, well, just hours into it. There is, if it holds, going to be negotiations taking place. Talk about what has happened.
Well, the first thing is to have clarity about why there is a ceasefire. The last time I was on the program, I mentioned that Prime Minister Netanyahu, he basically operates under two constraints. The international constraint, namely, there are limits to the kinds of death and destruction he can inflict on Gaza. And then there's the domestic constraint, which is Israeli society doesn't tolerate a large number of combatant deaths. He launched the ground invasion for reasons which no point in going into now, and inflicted massive death and destruction on Gaza. The main enabler was, of course, President Obama. Each day he came out, he or one of his spokespersons, and said, Israel has the right to defend itself. Each time he said that, it was the green light to Israel that it can continue with its terror bombing of Gaza. That went on for day after day after day, schools, mosques, hospitals targeted. But then you reached the limit. The limit was when Israel started to target the UN shelters. Targeted one shelter, there was outrage. Targeted a second shelter, there was outrage. And now the pressure began to build up in the United Nations. This is the United Nations. These are UN shelters. And the pressure began to build up. It reached a boiling point with the third shelter. And then Ban Ki-moon, the comatose Secretary General of the United Nations and a U.S. puppet, even he was finally forced to say something, saying these are criminal acts. Obama was now cornered. He was looking ridiculous in the world. It was a scandal. Even the UN Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, was now calling it a criminal act. So finally, Obama, the State Department, said unacceptable, deplorable, and frankly, it's exactly what happened in 1999 in Timor. The limits had been reached. Clinton said to the Indonesian army, time to end the massacre, and exactly happened now. Obama signaled to Netanyahu the terror bombing has to stop. So Netanyahu had reached the limit of international tolerance, which basically means the United States. And then there was a domestic issue. Israel had launched a ground invasion ostensibly to stop these so-called rocket attacks, but then it turned into something different, the tunnels. Now, the tunnels had nothing to do with Israel. That's totally ridiculous. Israel claims there were 12 tunnels that had passed through its border. There were many more tunnels between Gaza and Egypt. The first thing Sisi did when he came into power in Egypt was seal the tunnels. Did he have to destroy all of Gaza to seal the tunnels? Israel couldn't have done the same thing, seal the tunnels on its side of the border, exactly what Sisi did in Egypt? What did the Hamas had? It had spoons, it had shovels. You're telling me that Israel didn't have the earth-moving equipment to build a wall that went deeper than the tunnels? It had nothing to do with the tunnels entering Israel. The problem was the tunnels in Gaza. It turned out they had created a fairly sophisticated network of tunnels. Incidentally, I know we're not allowed to make these comparisons, not unlike the bunkers that were built in the Warsaw Ghetto. Primitive, but effective. And the Hamas fighters were able to come out of the tunnels, and they inflicted a significant number of casualties on Israel. During Operation Cast Lead in 2008-9, 10 Israeli combatants were killed, of which 4 were from friendly fire. This time it was about 65. Now, during the Lebanon War in 2006, about 120 Israeli combatants were killed. But that was against the Hezbollah, which is a formidable guerrilla army. So half and more were killed in Gaza this time. So Israel's aim was not to destroy the tunnels going into Israel. That's ridiculous. What they wanted to do was destroy the tunnel system inside Gaza, because now an effective, not very effective, but an effective guerrilla force had been created. And Israel, every few years, has to, or less than few years, has to mow the lawn in Gaza. And so they wanted to make sure the next time they mow the lawn.
Why do you say mow the lawn?
Well, that's the Israeli expression. You go in and you kill 1,000 people, destroy everything in sight, and Israel calls that mowing the lawn. So every few years they have to go into Gaza and mow the lawn. They want to make sure next time they mow the lawn, because if you read the Israeli commentators, who are really a sick bunch of people, all of them are talking now about the next war.